Hello, YouTubers, brothers and sisters in the Lord, and to all my subscribers. Today I'd like to continue from the 4 facts and the 4 videos that I have already made and explained to you the 4 facts that undergird the resurrection of Jesus. With this video, I'd like to talk about how these facts were considered as being qualified as facts, and in what ways and how are they qualified as facts. So I like to mention that the 4 facts has to be accounted for or wrapped up in what explains the existence of these 4 facts. So what can best explain it? And I like to quote the historian B McCullough, well-renowned historian, who lists out 6 things that 6 tests that can be used to qualify if these are facts, and how that these facts are best explained so that they're tied up together and validifies the 4 evidences that undergird the resurrection of Jesus as facts. So B McCullough, the historian, talks about that the explanation has to the 6 tests will reveal the great explanatory scope or the great explanatory power that ties up or accounts for the 4 facts that undergo the resurrection of Jesus. And I did mention about it, the 4 facts being the burial of Jesus and the disappearance. Why what happened to the body of Jesus, that it could suddenly just disappear from the tomb. And also another one is that sorry, excuse me, got a frog in my throat, so my voice is really hoarse, and I really hope that I'm able to pull through this video, because it's been quite a while before I did my last video, and just didn't want to delay it anymore. And also the disciples of the followers of Jesus repeatedly seeing the post-mortem Jesus being alive, and why that is the case. And also the before I get into these, the hypothesis that the disciples believe in for the 4 evidences, to best explain the 4 evidences, which in my last 4 videos I have already explained. The burial of Jesus by Joseph of Arimathea, the empty tomb, the multiplicity and the diversity of the witnesses seeing Jesus being alive after his death, and fourthly, how Christianity came about, with the belief of that Jesus had been risen from the dead. So what the followers believe was that the hypothesis that God had raised Jesus from the dead best explains why these 4 facts exist. Like I've already said, these 4 facts have been accepted by the majority of contemporary New Testament scholars, whether they are atheists or Christians. that hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead does have great explanatory scope and power, and we'll be able to best explain why Jesus' body disappeared from the tomb, why the followers of Jesus and the disciples repeatedly saw the post-mortem Jesus after he passed, after his death, seeing him alive, and despite the obvious open public execution and crucifixion of Jesus, and also the divine confirmation of Jesus' radical claims that he claimed to be God, and with that claim, of course, he was condemned to death, to be crucified to death. So another thing is that these are not ad hoc or contrived sort of hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead and things like that. Well, of course, for those who think the four facts are going to be tied up or explained in other ways, there are other contending explanations which are not currently accepted by the majority of the scholars, of the New Testament scholars, as the best explanation. But so of course, for those who do not believe that God exists, they would have they would think that they would have to accept this additional hypothesis that God exists, which is not applicable to the disciples, of course, who already believe that God exists. And so let's track back 6 things. What the hypothesis of God having raised Jesus from the dead explains 6 things. Best explained, the 6 points as to why Jesus' body disappeared from the tomb, as to why he was repeatedly seen. The post-mortem Jesus is repeatedly seen by his followers and disciples. And the 3rd point, that his resurrection is a divine confirmation of his radical claim as being God. And 4th, it is not an ad hoc or the contrived sort of requirement that God exists, because it's already in the belief of the disciples. Number 5, it is well accepted and also by people at large that the natural man, people don't just naturally rise from the dead. So therefore it is not, I would say, a belief that is far-fetched that God raised Jesus from the dead. Number 6, especially if we are, number 5, if we are supposedly to be people of a rational mind, human beings of rational mind, then you would think that's a natural thing. If man cannot naturally rise from the dead, then something of a higher power, whom we call God, must have done the rising of the dead. And lastly, there are other hypotheses or explanations that try to wrap up the 4 facts that undergirds the resurrection of Jesus, which, like I said, has not been accepted. And because they are these rival hypotheses contending against the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead, do not meet the other conditions. There are other conditions. List of 6 tests that McCullough, the historian McCullough, put out in. And it's not meeting the other 5 conditions, as this hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead. And it's not a new thing that you have this contending hypothesis that it's a conspiracy. Conspiracy theory out there, or the conspiracy hypothesis, and then you also have the apparent death hypothesis, which means that Jesus really dead and gone, and then you have the hallucination hypothesis, that all this is just some kind of hallucination, and in fact lately it's even the twin brother hypothesis. A professor from the University of California, Irvine, who has finished his doctoral dissertation on the evidences of the resurrection of Jesus, who's very familiar with all the 4 facts: the burial of Jesus by Joseph of Arimathea, the disappearance of Jesus' body from the tomb, the diverse witnesses of Jesus's seeing Jesus being alive after his death, and the origins of how the disciples started Christianity on the belief that he resurrected from the dead. These 4 facts, of course, this particular professor believed, has no doubt that accepted, and there's no doubt that these are 4 facts. But on the other hand, this professor comes up with the twin brother theory. The twin brother theory, which means that Jesus had a twin brother who was separated from Jesus and grew up, independently somewhere. And during the crucifixion of Jesus in Jerusalem, the twin brother came back, stole Jesus' body from the tomb, presented himself before the disciples who mistook the twin brother as Jesus. This is, to me, it's so far-fetched and ridiculous. But it just shows that if people don't want to believe, they just don't want to believe, and to just come up with anything they can go with such desperate length to just explain away that God did raise Jesus from the dead. Just taking the position of a skeptic and just stubbornly and not wanting to get out of that position. In fact, the famous Jewish theologian or professor, who was a professor in the Hebrew University of Israel. He himself openly accepts and acknowledges that he's convinced that with the 4 facts that undergird Jesus' resurrection, he's convinced that the God of Israel raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. And so I think the bottom line is, what is significant but the resurrection is that the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth is that God has vindicated him. The death of Jesus by crucifixion brought about by the Jews because he was condemned as a heretic, claiming himself with blasphemous claims that he's God, but then having divine authority. But yet on the other hand, if he's raised from the dead by God, and we know that the resurrection of Jesus is indeed a divine imprimatur, or what we call divine approval, and from God, that Jesus, whatever he claimed, he was whatever he claimed to be as God. So with that, I'd like to say that for those of you who believe Jesus having resurrected from the dead and accepting him and believing him as God is indeed a very rock solid fact here, that believers can stand on it, without any weakness here, and it's because it's indeed it's a decisive revelation from God, who reveals himself in the man of Jesus. And if we talk about ourselves as being rational human beings, then it's only logical that we would believe that Jesus has resurrected from the dead and is raised by God, and that he is God himself. I guess that's all I have to say as to why the four facts are indeed being qualified as facts, and as not just something weak, and as to why it's so logical and naturally rational for the rational human being to believe that Jesus had been raised by God from the dead, and that himself is God, and his claim is vindicated. So that's all for now, and thank you for watching and listening, and I hope to be able to share more of other religious videos soon. Thank you, and God bless.